Good evening, everybody. I am Tara Ollapally, co-founder of Camp Arbitration and Mediation Practice, and I'm delighted to introduce our fifth session, part of our mediation webinar series, which we have been privileged to co-host with IDEX Legal. Over the past few months, every 2 weeks, we have brought to you fascinating conversations on various subjects related to mediation. We discussed the need for a standalone law in India, whether mandatory mediation is the push that India needs, mediating online during these times of COVID-19. And of course, our last session was on building a social muscle to bring in a culture of collaboration in our country. Today's discussion is on private mediation, yet another critical topic to discuss. In India, so far, mediation has largely been driven by the court-annexed mediation programs. In the past few years, a new important practice has been emerging, the practice of private mediation. And this is a critical step in the growth of the mediation movement in our country. It opens up a new genre of cases that can be mediated. It attracts a different set of professionals into the movement, and also allows for mediation to be accessed at a much earlier stage. And we are delighted to have an amazing panel of international private mediators who have pioneered the growth of private mediation in their own jurisdictions. And we have them from across time zones. We have Lim Tat, who joins us with his post-dinner drink at 10 p.m. We have Bruce Edwards from San Francisco, who is up before the crack of dawn at 6 a.m. We have John from Glasgow, who perhaps joins us with his afternoon tea. And of course, Lila and Jonathan, who are getting ready for dinner from Bangalore. So this is a fascinating discussion. But to truly introduce our panel, give me a few minutes. I'll do a quick job because I know we have a very exciting discussion to get on to. We have Bruce Edwards, who is not new to the mediation space in India. We've had discussions with him. He's one of the founding partners of JAMS, which is one of the largest provider of private ADR services in the world. And Bruce is one of its most experienced mediators. He's been a mediator since the mid-1980s and has mediated over 7,000 disputes throughout the US. He truly has built that practice of private mediation and offers a perspective on this subject that very few have. So thank you so much for being with us, Bruce. It's an honor to have you with us.
So much.
John Sturrock is the founder and lead mediator at Core Solutions, who again has pioneered the private mediation movement in the UK. He's regarded as one of Scotland's finest mediators. John has been involved in hundreds of mediations covering a broad range of disputes in both the private and public sectors. He has worked with parties in the US, in the UK, in mainland Europe, Middle East, Africa. He's a thought leader in the mediation movement. And again, John is as good as it gets for us to engage in this discussion. Thank you so much, John, for being with us today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much indeed, Tara.
We have Lim Tat, who is lauded as one of the best in Singapore for mediation services. Tat is a leading mediator in Singapore who practices extensively also as a mediation advocate and counsel. He co-founded Maxwell Mediators to promote mediation for complex, multi-jurisdictional cross-border disputes. With Singapore as a hub for dispute resolution, especially for Asian parties, Tat has a unique perspective on how this part of the world is responding to the growth of mediation. Thank you so much, Tat, for being with us.
Thank you, Tara.
Finally, we have Lila, who is the founder of Camp Arbitration and Mediation Practice, also in full disclosure, my mom. Lila was a lawyer for nearly 2 decades with a practice in the Karnataka High Court and the Supreme Court of India. Until she encountered mediation in 2006, she first started off as the founding coordinator of the Bangalore Mediation Center, which is one of the most successful court-annexed mediation programs in our country. Feeling the need to take mediation beyond court-annexed mediation programs, she set up CAMP in 2015. Lila has mediated innumerable cases and has been part of the leading the movement of private mediation in India. And welcome, Laila. Thanks for being with us on this very important discussion. Our moderator is the charming Jonathan, who is my partner in crime to make mediation happen in India. He is our colleague at CAMP who leads the online mediation and business relations vertical. Many of you are familiar with Jonathan's energy, his passion, and his commitment to mediation. He's just returned from the UK, where he earned his master's degree in mediation and conflict resolution at the University of Strathclyde. So over to you, Jonathan, to lead this discussion. Thank you for organizing this session. And thank you everyone for being a part of the discussion. A housekeeping note, we will be taking in questions. Please write in at the Q&A section. During the course of this discussion, we shall open it up for questions. So over to you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. A very good morning, Bruce. Good afternoon, John. Good evening, Laila. And Tat, I'm so tempted to say good night, but we need you for the next 75 minutes. So thank you so much for being there. Just a disclaimer right in the start, I might end up blushing a lot during the next 1 hour, and that's because I'm among greatness. As a young mediator, you're always looking out for role models, to look up to those who have been there and done that. And I think they couldn't have been a better panel than what we have today. So just forgive my fanboy moments if I do get into those situations. So to keep me focused and to kind of allow all of you surf through the next 1 hour, I'm going to let down a kind of an agenda for today. So we're going to talk about 4 rough things. One is talking about the current challenges that are facing mediation today. We're going to talk about maybe the past, the history of private mediation, but with a bit of a twist. We're going to talk about the role of a lawyer in private mediation, and finally touch a bit upon the future for private mediation. So jumping straight into the first section, we're going to talk about the history of private mediation, but as I said, with a twist. Instead of getting down to historical facts from books and journals, we're going to get into personal notes of our 4 panelists today. So starting with you, Tat, take us back to that moment when you made your first buck with mediation. What was that feeling like the night before you got in, on the eve of your first private mediation? And what was it like when it concluded?
Well, thanks, John. I think my experience probably resonates with practitioners in Singapore, but maybe not so much with folks elsewhere in the world. By the time I arrived at the point to make my first serious buck from private mediation, I had done something close to like 50 court annex mediations. And those court annex mediations sort of allowed me to cut my teeth and to meet mediation counsel and to deal with the whole myriad of different cases within the court system. So for me, that moment, the night before the first private mediation case, I would say that it's really more symbolic than exceptional in my mind. I don't recall, first of all, it wasn't a life-changing moment. In my sense, it was more a transition. And I also remember I didn't want to permit myself the luxury of believing that this would signal a flood of cases moving forward, because, you know, it was more a sense of really, I would call quiet gratitude. Gratification that I've arrived at a point where I'm given a chance to mediate a first private case. And I recognize there's so many hundreds of certified accredited mediators who are longing for that opportunity as well. And so I recall the case being a commercial one. The dispute was over $1 million, and in the end, it was resolved. So coming to the end point of the case, and not unusually, the first couple of private mediation cases having a settlement meant exhilaration, meant a sense of elation, you know, feeling that you've done something very meaningful. And then moving onwards, years from then, looking back and, you know, that sense evolving, that nowadays, when there is a settlement or not a settlement, I find that it's more a quiet sense of satisfaction if I believe I've done my best. So, you know, closing that topic, you know, and talking about that first buck, actually, it wasn't a very, very big buck because, you know, to be honest, I think I made more bucks as a mediation advocate in terms of fees than really as a neutral. But, you know, maybe one day I'll reach the point where, like Bruce and John, you know, I could command those kinds of fees. But, you know, looking forward to the horizon. But back to you, John.
They're going to come back on that interesting point you made about mediation lawyers making some good money, but we'll reserve that for later. I think I'm going to now pan over to Laila. And much before you became a private mediator, you were a practicing High Court and Supreme Court lawyer, right? So what was that element of your first private mediation that stayed with you and kind of lingered on, that made you give up your legal career for a profession completely dedicated to private mediation? So what was that stayed with you?
So you're taking me back to 2009. I was a court mediator for 2 years by then, and there was an urgent request for private mediation. It was a family dispute, a family business dispute. There were 6 brothers involved. They had filed 10 cases against each other, and 2 brothers died. And the family believed that they died because of the stress of litigation. And they saw a window of opportunity because all the brothers from different parts of the world had come for the funeral of the second brother's death. So they asked for this mediation. And I knew I had picked up some of the skills of mediation, but this was my first private mediation and my first commercial mediation of this scale. So I was a little nervous, but I decided to be bold and I said yes. And in my own intuitive way, I convened, I got the brothers, the legal representatives, structured the mediation that the wives would come in, worked with the lawyers. It was very early on. I had to tell them the difference between mediation and arbitration, help them understand what kind of documents to come with, work with the financial experts, technical experts to ensure that all information is on the table for parties to take an informed decision as they negotiate. And I remember we had a 40-hour back-to-back mediation. We settled last day midnight, and honestly, it was a great moment for me. I just felt that many doors were opening. I realized that in private mediation, it's possible to customize, personalize. There was scope for creativity, for efficiency, for professionalism. So I decided that I need to do something with this newfound skill. And to add to that, 2011, 2 years later, I went as a fellow to JAMS Foundation, and I had this opportunity to see private mediation at a different scale altogether. And there sits my guru, Bruce. I observed Bruce's mediation. I remember it was multi-party, about 60 parties. And it was mind-boggling what this process that I was learning, the potential of it. Came back determined, and thus CAMP was born.
Thank you so much. It felt like we traveled for like 10 years in 2 minutes. And that's something that you can't really do. You can't take, there's so many emotions and so many journeys and so many, lanes between that, in that journey.
Yes, Jonathan. That's
and I'm going to come back to you on structuring a private mediation, but that's a very interesting point you raised there. But now panning back to the UK and panning back to John, who was at the peak of his legal career as a Queen's Counsel. And then at the stroke of the century, he decides to leave it all behind and be a private mediator. So John, what was that left you wanting for more, to give up your role as a lawyer and choose a profession completely in private mediation?
Well, can I say, first of all, Jonathan, it's great to see you. Last time I saw you, I think we were both in Edinburgh, and I should say, Tara, that I come from Edinburgh, not Glasgow, and the distinction is very important in these parts of the world. But yeah, and thanks, Jonathan, for the opportunity to be here. I mean, I really enjoyed the law and the practice of law. I loved being a courtroom advocate, and if I may say so, I hope humbly, I was quite good at it. But I'd already begun a different journey in the 1990s. I'd got into advocacy skills training, and I'd gone around the world and learned about advocacy skills training, and I found myself with a natural aptitude for working with other people and helping people to flourish and blossom and develop their skills. So at the Scottish Bar, I took on the mantle of inaugurating our advocacy skills program. And incidentally, as part of my learning, I went off to Harvard in 1996 and undertook the Harvard negotiation course under the great Professor Roger Fisher, the co-author of Getting to Yes. And frankly, it did change my life. It was a life-changing moment. And later that same summer, I undertook the summer school, international summer school run by CEDAR, then the prominent British mediation provider. And again, my life was changed forever. I mean, I was profoundly affected by the discovery that there were cooperative ways to resolve problems and not merely adversarial, which I'd become so accustomed to and so much, I think, aligned with. So I had a choice in the late 90s to stay at the Scottish Bar, develop my practice, or do something different. And well, my sense is and was, Jonathan, there's only one life, and I wanted to make a difference. And I think I felt I'd seen a way to make a difference with very little commercial mediation in Scotland at that time. In fact, I think none really to speak of. And I was very keen to bring commercial mediation to Scotland and also high quality professional training, which I'd become accustomed to with the advocacy skills work. And that got me into negotiation and mediation training as well. And I suppose also it fitted my personality. I became more of who I think I really am. I rediscovered who I am and my aspirations, and indeed my spiritual sense, my soul, as it were, fitted much more comfortably with this cooperative approach to problem solving. So I stepped off the conveyor belt, and I suppose the rest is history. But I had and have a real conviction about interest-based negotiation and the value of helping people to find cooperative solutions. I mean, that is absolutely the heart now of who I am and what I aspire still to be. And it's been a great 20 years, Jonathan. I have no regrets at all. There's an alternative career I might have followed, but this has been wonderful. What a privilege indeed it has been to follow this mediator path. So I hope that answers your question, at least in part.
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons why we have this first section is to kind of inspire everyone out there who's planning to pursue a career in private mediation. There are a lot of mediators out there who've been trained in different organizations, but they're struggling to get going. And the intention for this first part is to see if these stories inspire everyone else attending and participating to kind of take that plunge, carpe diem, and go out there and seek their careers. So panning over to Bruce quickly now. Bruce, you started mediating much before I was even born. And so what did you see there in the 1980s that you felt like this could be an actual profession? This mediation could be a profession, as it could be a private mediator. What were your first memories of mediation and the struggles that you went through to be who you are today?
Thank you, Jonathan. And I hope everybody's paying close attention to my colleagues' stories, because the passion that everyone feels for this profession hopefully comes through the screen. And I'll come back to that word in just a moment. In the mid-1980s, I was a young lawyer, and I had a background in psychology with some experience in counseling, certainly some life experience that brought me into a world of connecting with people. And I think I just had an idea as much as anything. The light bulb went off, to use a sort of tired metaphor, when I saw in my early stages of being a lawyer how we were approaching dispute resolution from a sort of time-honored sense in the legal profession. But it just didn't match up with what I had learned in my classes in psychology and my counseling experience. And this idea of getting to the interest-based solutions for people was really kind of the light bulb moment for me. And then I was young enough that I probably had more enthusiasm than common sense, so that I was willing, unlike John, our colleague, who maybe walked away at the the pinnacle of his career, I wasn't even close. So maybe I wasn't risking too much. On the other hand, my parents thought I was somewhat foolish, risking a lot, leaving the profession of law for something that nobody had ever heard of. But through all of that, it was just a process that made too much sense really to ignore. And like John, believed you only live once, and to try and take full advantage of the gifts that we're given. And so I think I tell this story time and again, not for any moment of self-aggrandizement, but really to hopefully inspire everybody who's listening that if I can do it, you can do it. In other words, I was not a retired judge. I was not an accomplished lawyer. I was not some money-backed venture capital project. I was just a guy with a passion, hopefully with a little bit of a skill set that's proven out over time, but really at that stage, more a passion than anything else. And so if I can do it, you can do it is kind of the message I hope people take from this, and really just marry your passion with your skills and go for it.
I like that. Marry your passion with your skills. So what I'm hearing from all of you, I think today is that the key themes seem like resilience, the courage to take a risk, take the plunge. It has to be a calling. It has to be vocational. It's a bit spiritual, as I see for all four of you, and of course that feeling of wanting to make a difference of sorts to the communities that you are part of. I want to break into so thank you so much for all those very short stories that you had to share with us. I want to break into the second section, but before I do that, I would request Ria from IDEX to kindly put us the first poll up today evening to get a sense of private mediation, the exposure to private mediation that our attendees have today. So let's have the first poll up, please. So the poll basically reads, how many private mediations do you engage in every year? I just want all of us to also remember in the audience that we are a very diverse crowd. So it's not just attendees from India, we have attendees from across the globe. So you might be surprised with some of the answers. All right, I think we can end the poll. So it's 66% of our attendees today say it's below 2. That's not surprising to a lot of us who have realized that this has been a struggle for some time now. And I think that's where we kind of move into our second section today. We're talking about the challenges that we are facing today in private mediation. And coming to you, Tat, straight away, one of the biggest challenges I think we face as service providers of private mediation is converting these calls that we get into cases. So many people do call in, they show interest, but they hesitate to actually wet their feet. So now, how do you get like a hesitant client to see value in your role as a professional mediator to kind of actually try mediation? How do you convert that call into a mediation? Just would like to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that part of the answer is that it's very jurisdiction specific. And so I only speak about anecdotally what happens within my practice and the practice that I see around Singapore and Asia. And you'll find that the convening in commercial mediations is very frequently done by lawyers in my jurisdiction. So the lawyers are the ones who reach out to a mediator and ask whether there's a mediator is available, and if so, what are the fee structure and all that. By the time they reach me as to ask about whether I'm available, they are already committed to the mediation process. And so the convening has evolved in Singapore from folks who are non-committal, reaching out just to get a sense of whether or not you could convince them, towards a landscape now where people are by and large conversant with what the process is like. And when they do reach out, they are really looking for a mediator that best fits the dispute that they have. That's a good space to be in, I feel, but also it becomes a space where if you are a mediator who's looking to carve out, your space under the sun, I think one has to be confident of what are your skill sets, what's your calling, and be very confident in what you're trying to do. You're trying to help the parties use a process that has worked for many people in order to find their own solutions. The other thing I would say in this space is I find sometimes, and because of the nature of my practice, that there's a need to be humble about this. Humility to me is so important. I think sometimes, you know, and not to say that this is something that gets to the minds of people who are accomplished, but you can get away with the notion that it is you who's allowing the parties to settle, you know, it's all your skill set, but actually one needs to pay attribute to the process itself. It is the process, and also your success in the process is sometimes heavily reliant on the mediation counsel that appears before you. And so very frequently, if I were to meet parties who know very little about mediation, I would talk about what the process is, what their mediation looks like, my role, and how I can help them through the process, and then leave the rest for them to mull over and come back to me if they have any other questions. But you know, that's what I would do in the space that I operate within Singapore.
Just going to deviate off script for a few seconds and check with Bruce, John, and Laila if that's something that you know you've experienced in your jurisdiction also, wherein the lawyers play a huge role in kind of bringing the parties to the table. A quick comment if you wish to what Tat has just said.
John, your thoughts?
About lawyers being, I mean, lawyers are significantly the gatekeepers, and that's the reality of it, particularly if we view mediation in the context of the litigated disputes. And of course, that's the paradigm that so many of us have in a sense fallen into. I'm going to comment a bit more on this, if I may, during my next answer, but I think we have to look wider than that. Because the answer, and Angela, you're asking about advice, I'll mention this later again, we have to look wider, I think, than the obvious. And that the obvious, of course, is that the lawyers, in a sense, protect dispute resolution. And that could be a very narrow focus. But enough from me for now.
And I'll just add, Jonathan, similarly, I'll save comments for later, but that's why now we all appreciate that lawyers are the gatekeepers, the more significant stakeholders in this commercial process. And the opportunity to address their fears and concerns and help them appreciate how to best navigate this process, not to be fearful of it, is really, I think, an important sort of next generation focus for all of us in this community.
As for India, we are still very new and we do have a crisis in our system. We have 34 million cases pending. There is emergency and everybody is struggling. So there has to be a concerted effort to make this happen.
So I hear that, you know, getting the buy-in from the lawyers could be one way of converting those calls into actual mediation cases. Panning over you to John now, you actually decided to, you know, move away, as you already stated, from your career as a legal counsel, but also you also moved away from court-referred mediations very early on, and you kind of started branding yourself as a private mediator. How important was that for you to kind of move away from pro bono work in court-referred mediations and actually start your own brand? How did that help in branding yourself as a private mediator?
Well, frankly, Jonathan, I could not have become a more or less full-time, not full-time, but made mediation my career had I not done this. Insofar as there was, when I started in a court-referred mediation, it was a very, very small amount. It remains a very small amount in Scotland. So I don't really recognize the distinction that you're making between court-referred and private mediation. And most mediators in Scotland regard themselves as what you might call as private, in the sense that we do our own thing because the court referral is so small in all respects. So I had no choice but to set myself up as a mediator, whether I call it a private mediator, or I would prefer to call myself as a mediator in practice and in business. There was no alternative but to do that. And I think I wanted to establish and show that mediation could be a valuable and valid business proposition. So rather than setting up as a not-for-profit or in some other voluntary capacity, I wanted to show business people and others, public sector, not-for-profit sector, that a mediation business could be run on sound commercial business principles. Maybe not making lots of money, but it could be run on that basis. And of course, it's important to remember that we bring huge added value to every dispute or other difference in which we're involved. And so it's important to look at it from the value end rather than the cost end, and we can tend to forget that even ourselves. So I wanted to show that we were a business that we could survive and indeed thrive as a business. So that meant that we had to create the market. And again, I'm just thinking about what Angela has been saying in her question on the chat function. We had to create a market for mediation, because there was virtually no mediation in the commercial world, for the little business core, which I had set up, and for those of us, myself included, who were holding ourselves out as mediators. And it was just like any startup. And I think we tend to forget that as mediators. We're starting up new businesses. And that means that we have to think about investment. We have to think about time, commitment, branding, website, social media, networking, public relations, all of the things which the business schools would tell us are important in setting up a new business. Now, that's not easy in the legal world. There are ethical issues, there are perception issues, there are expectations. And certainly for me, leaving the Scottish Bar, where at that stage there were some real constraints in advertising, there was a tension. It wasn't something I was accustomed to doing, and it wasn't something that my professional colleagues particularly appreciated me doing either. But it meant that I had to begin to build my own practice as a mediator based on my own efforts. I wasn't relying on the courts or other people to hand it to me in a plate. Now that's hard work. Of course it's hard work. I fear, however, and I sometimes perceive, that mediators receive their training and then expect that mediations will fall off the great mediation tree, and that without an enormous amount of effort. So again, I think that we can't expect, like any other small business, new work to come unless we work very, very hard to go and find it. And that may mean leaving whatever it is you do at present, the safety of what you do at present, taking a risk, because doing new things involves risk. There may be returns to come in due course, monetary and non-monetary, but it's that, I think, that we have to wrestle with. And I think, as Tara said at the beginning, as we've been hinting at already, we need to look at mediation much more broadly than simply being a facet of the civil justice marketplace, as it were, or institution. In fact, there's an argument that we've viewed mediation the wrong way around. My colleague Anna Howard will talk about.
Oh, John's screen froze, it looks like.
Yes, let's give him a few seconds to come back. Maybe otherwise we could just jump over. All right, we'll probably get back to John as soon as he gets back there. But I think I'll just pan over to you now, Bruce. John is talking about startups, treating mediation, treating your career as a private mediator as a startup. One of the biggest startups of the 20th century, JAMS. We all know the work that you put in then in the 1980s to make what it is today. So what can we learn from your struggles then, when JAMS was a really small institution, and how it grew up into proportions and to what it is today? What can we learn from those times that we can now implement in other jurisdictions that are still in a very nascent stage of private mediation? What are those learnings that you could share with us from your early days with JAMS?
So you want me to describe how you take a startup into a national company in 60 seconds or so? It's yes. I think 3 words come to mind: plan, execution, and perseverance. And we obviously started out with very humble origins, a little 1,200 square foot office, at least me and my partner initially, and merged several times our lawyer mediation companies, ultimately with a group of retired judges, and have grown to, as you pointed out earlier, the largest provider of commercial mediation services in the United States, if not the world. Last year, we did about 16,000 disputes, primarily mediation, but including some arbitration. We have over 400 mediators and arbitrators, and we're about a $200 million US annualized corporation. So I say that not because that's my effort. It's a collection of a host of people working hard over the last 30 years to grow to this size and stature. But my point in saying all of this is to show what can be done, because those of us that started down this path clearly had no idea that we could take it to this level. We had no idea that this market would respond as it has. And for those of you listening, you enjoy an advantage that most of us did not enjoy. And that advantage was that that advantage is that the market to some degree is created for you already, that there are examples to turn to, whether it's within the court system or it's within private practice, like we're describing for you today, lessons to draw from others, and the knowledge that it can be accomplished is a valuable starting point that we just didn't enjoy. But that's a little bit sort of the overview, but there is no substitute for the planning. Obviously, you need to be professional in your execution. And as we all talk about routinely, this idea of patience and perseverance is so important. I mean, I take a 50-year view to trying to develop and change a legal system in the United States that's over 250 years old. Maybe 400 if we go back to our roots in England. And yet in a scant 30 years, we've been able to sort of fundamentally shift the paradigm of how lawyers and courts and others approach dispute resolution. And maybe you want to segue back to John now that we have him back on screen, because I think he was really starting to develop an important point, which is looking at mediation in the commercial world is just one small piece of what really should be a much broader approach to mediation.
Yes, please go ahead, John.
Yeah, sorry, I can only think that my Zoom software tried to upgrade itself during this seminar. I got a notice about Zoom 5. Anyway, I do apologize. I was really coming to remarks. I see my internet connection is unstable, so I do hope you can still hear me. And I was suggesting that we think out of this of business. Obviously, the lawyers are important as gatekeepers, as we said before. We need to respect them and work with them. But think of all the other potential areas where mediation can be carried out, other clients. Now, I had the great privilege in the run-up to the 2012 Olympics and Paralympics in London to work extensively with athletes, performance directors, others involved in that. And that was through no connection with the legal world, but because I had made connections in other ways with others who were involved. Politics, policy making. I now find that some clients in both business and in the public sector will come directly to me or us. And that's just the result of what Bruce is talking about. It's hard work, it's many years, and I know some of you are starting out, and you have to put in the graft, if I may use that word. I mean that in a polite way, the hard resources and thinking through your networks, your public relations, your training opportunities, the connections you can make. But I think maybe that stimulates some thoughts about a more creative and expansive view about what we are and what we do, and therefore what we offer.
Thank you, John. I think most of what you're trying to say is also for mediators to start thinking out of the box and not just going with the cliche of how we've been trying to market our services for all these years, thinking out of the box, thinking of creative ways to reach out to the market. And now panning over to Laila, I think one of the things that has been discussed and debated a lot is mandatory mediation. One way to bring the client to the table is, insist on them trying mediation. But bringing them to the table doesn't mean that they will participate, right? At the same time, there is the debate about whether, bringing them to the table is, by insisting that they try mediation, would that compromise on the voluntary nature of mediation? So how important it is for a private mediator and also for a private mediation service provider to find that balance between, pulling in a client, inviting them to mediation, and at the same time making sure that they have that voluntary nature of mediation all through.
Yes, Jonathan, I think mandatory and mediation are oxymorons. Having said that, we need a change of mindset. I'm talking about India. We are facing a crisis. Mediation is new. We need a change of mindset. And when parties are in conflict, they don't like it when you suggest collaboration. when you suggest mediation. So maybe a gentle push is required so that they have that positive experience of mediation and slowly begin to change mindset. And some countries, for this reason, have opted for mandatory, like Italy has the easy opt-out mandatory mediation. Now in India, we have the Commercial Courts Act, which has brought in mandatory mediation. And as you rightly said, even in private mediation, we have one person who comes in who's very eager for mediation, but is unable to get the other person. And then at camp, we do contact the other person and try to persuade that person to come in for mediation. But I think it's important to recognize that mediation, which is a voluntary, self-determinative process, we have to be very clear that only if they can get a positive experience can they be pushed. Otherwise, it's double-edged, it can boomerang. So we need to be very clear that the mediation experience is positive, the mediators have good skills, the systems are efficient, structured, well, so that if we don't do that, parties will either avoid mediation, as we are seeing sometimes in the mandatory processes, they will avoid, or they might just participate so that they have gone through the motions and then decide that never again mediation. So I think that's very important, but when required, maybe we can gently push and always keep in mind that the mediation market is very sensitive, very nuanced, and the marketing should be creative and authentic so that parties really feel the need. Even in private mediation, when we bring them in, we need to understand that our job is to explain mediation to them, explain the difference between mediation and arbitration, and allow them to feel that they want to try it and not push too hard. If they are resisting, leave it. They'll come to us sometime or the other. Keep in mind, creative and authentic marketing and a genuine push.
Sorry, did I interrupt you? All right. So I think, I hear you out, Leila, but I think it's also very frustrating time for a lot of private mediators who are just getting started, right? They've got themselves trained, they know they have the knowledge and skills to go ahead. Yet it's a very frustrating time to get started. So I just want a quick comment, deviating a bit from the script right now, but quick comment from all the rest of the panelists. How important is to manage or balance that, as Leila was just saying, balance that, the principles of voluntariness and at the same time making an effort to bring the client in, because how do you convert a curious client into a client who has now begun the mediation? And what are your thoughts on that? That we could go first.
Well, I'd say from an Asian context, I think one of the ways to convince parties to consider mediation is to have a system of mandatory mediation. And that's not a bad word actually in the local context in Singapore. That one of the key reasons why mediation has been so widely embraced in Singapore by so many people is because we had started court annex mediations where there's a presumption of ADR. And you get a flood of cases where parties are simply channeled to compulsory mediation. And it has worked out very well from the Singapore experience. And I'm not saying that that is going to be the same for other places, but I think within the Asian context, leadership from the top sometimes works very well in encouraging people to have a certain mindset. But back to you.
Jonathan,
Sorry. Yeah, Bruce, John, would you like to jump in before we move into the next section?
Well, I mean, there's clearly a balance. I think Leila said it very well. The balance is the tension between getting people to experience the process, because all learning is experiential. We believe fundamentally that once people get in the door, you've got a heightened opportunity to create a valuable experience for them, one that they will not only appreciate in the moment, but will take with them over time and tell others about. And you have to balance, and those opportunities sometimes come through, court processes, through contractual provisions, through statutes, through policies. There's a lot of ways that people sort of get gently shoved in the door. But as Lila was so well speaking about, once they're in that room, your job is to fundamentally embrace the notion of self-determination, the notion of voluntariness and people's right to make decisions for themselves. And I think being candid and honest about that tension with people when they arrive, and sometimes if they do arrive in that moment because they've been pushed in the door, to acknowledge they have a choice to make. They can embrace the process, they can experience it, they can try it out, or they can reject it entirely. It's up to them. But I think as mediators, I think one of the things we need to think about at all times is to be realistic in our trajectory and our goals for the moment. And sometimes mediators try and move too quickly and try and create too ambitious an objective, with folks, when all that's really needed at the outset is to try and move them one step forward.
If I could just pick up, Jonathan, 3 words from Lila and Bruce: authenticity, choice, and realism. So let me just give a slightly different thought on this. The Zoom generation, the involvement of us all in online mediation has, for me, brought about an interesting development. I had always in the past tried to arrange to have conversations with the lawyers before the mediation day, but not so much with clients. What I'm finding more and more now, and I've got 2 lined up after this seminar, is that I have a chance, I make the opportunity to meet with the clients before the mediation event. We used to call it the mediation day, or even just the mediation, but it's a continuum, isn't it? And I think that if we can offer more and more authentic conversations in which we're realistic and we give people choice, and so that if someone's interested in mediation, not just the lawyer, but the client, as mediators, let's give them the opportunity to have a chat about it. And let's not try and impose ourselves or be so anxious about getting this mediation because it might give us our first or second or third mediation. Let's just have a conversation, talk about it, be authentic ourselves, and let them decide. And if they like us, and if we explain the process adequately, they may very well make a choice to start this journey and to try it out, as Bruce has suggested. So I think it's the little things like that. And I think we've probably tended to forget some of this in our passion and our evangelism and our pushing this. So I reflect back on my 20 years and I think, you know what, I could take this perhaps a little bit more gently, and maybe even have created more work as a result. So I hope that's helpful for some people starting out. Authentic conversations, very helpful.
Thank you so much, John. I think that's going to be really helpful for all our attendees today. We'll now walk into our third section, which is going to be focusing on lawyers and the role of the lawyer in a private mediation. Before we get started, let's have the second poll up, please. So we have a second poll up for our attendees and participants. So the second poll reads, mediation. So it's a statement: mediation forces lawyers to work in the shadows of the mediator, thus making them irrelevant to the settlement. Do you agree or you not agree? Okay, we can end the poll now. So 91% of our participants say disagree, don't agree with that. So it's a very initiated and very aware batch that we are working with today. But Bruce, you have worked with thousands of lawyers over the last few years in your practice as a commercial mediator. And I'm sure you've come across innumerable lawyers who were unsure of their role in a mediation. So what, according to you, is the role of a lawyer in a mediation in the simplest words? And what can mediators do to help lawyers understand their role much before the mediation starts?
think we've started with a common understanding, that is, lawyers are critical in the moment to be effective advocates for their clients and play an invaluable role in the mediation process. From a commercial standpoint, they also form the bridge to future opportunities for us as commercial mediators. So it's essential not just in the moment to treat them with respect, dignity, for benefit of the mediation in front of you, but ultimately, if we're looking to build connections that persist over our professional lives, that's an essential next step as well. You know, this idea of lawyers feeling disconnected, insecure, I think really is something we encounter throughout the world. You know, they're oftentimes described as the major impediments to us being able to move forward in the mediation profession with this sort of building business that we're all in pursuit of. And why is that? And over time, the more I've thought about it, the more I realize that most insecurities are based on fear. And they're often based on fear of understanding, of not understanding, fear of economic insecurity, other, you know, more primal fears that really can be addressed appropriately by us as mediators through an education process. And that's why the sort of focus on mediation advocacy for many of us throughout our careers, informally, hopefully now even in a more formal approach, to try and help lawyers understand what this process is about, that there is room for them to be appropriate, forceful advocates for their clients, and they can do it effectively. They can deliver winning results for their clients. And when you get people really engaged in the process with a keen understanding of their role and nuanced understanding of the unique skills that they need in the moment, and they find themselves working in this environment and doing it successfully. And that's how we convert people to move away from their insecurities and their fears and their resistance to a process that they really don't know much about at this stage. But I echo John's words, which is really contemplate moving slowly. One of my favorite words in mediation education is deceleration. And most of the folks coming to this process come from a legal background, which has benefits and it has curses. One of the curses is many of us are solution-oriented, type A kinds of personalities. Some are blessed with a wisdom and the ability to sort of see results in the future, and they're eager to try and get there. But what they forget is that they're leaving people behind who need to come along at their own pace. And so I think throughout this process with lawyers is understanding that lawyers come into this process with different degrees of motivation, and you need to assess and respond to those individually, and then move gradually with those folks to develop a comfort level and trust with you as you move them along the process. And doing that day in and day out, you will be building converts sort of one person at a time.
Thank you so much, Bruce. I think I hear you say it's important to make the lawyer understand his or her role in the mediation. And Laila, you talk a lot about how you need to start involving, mediators need to start involving lawyers in structuring a mediation, in designing a mediation process, a session. How have you found this very useful in your practice over the last few years?
You know, I just keep emphasizing the role of lawyers in mediation. And I think this panel has really emphasized that, gatekeepers, the role of advocacy in mediation. And I believe that a large part of the success of a mediation is lawyers who understand mediation. That makes a big difference. And why I say it? Negotiation in mediation is under the shadow of the law. Parties take a decision, an informed decision, when they understand the legal perspectives, what is available to them in court. The mediator is a neutral. I cannot give that legal opinion or legal advice. And it is the lawyer who provides that information. So a lawyer needs to come well prepared for mediation so that they can present that at the table. Another reason, Jonathan, structuring the mediation. Lawyers are familiar with this case. The mediator has just come in. It is in consultation with the lawyers that the mediator structures the process. Who are the people who should be there on the table? What is the documents? It is in consultation with the lawyers that the mediator designs the mediation. Third, lawyers coach the parties to negotiate. They are the coaches for the negotiation. Another important reason is that in courts, in litigation, and in arbitration, the judge passes a reasoned order. So we know why the order says that. But in mediation, it is terms of settlement. 99%, there's no reopening. But 1%, in case it reopens, it should be clear, it should be watertight within the framework of the law. And it is lawyers who are engaged with the drafting process. So lawyers are absolutely a big part of the mediation, more so in private mediation, because that's when we do complex cases and we need lawyers very much as a part of the process. So yes, Jonathan, I think advocacy in mediation will really train the lawyers to participate effectively in mediation.
Thank you, Laila. Panning over to Tat, you're I think one of the only panelists today who's also a practicing lawyer while you're a mediator. So how do you balance those roles? And also, basically, does your client actually see benefit of you, having that experience of a lawyer and also a mediator? Is that helpful to your branding as a mediator or even as a mediation lawyer? And the second question to you, Tat, is as a mediation lawyer, if you have represented your clients as a mediation lawyer or as a mediator, what do you expect from the mediation lawyer when you actually reach an impasse? How do you work with those kind of situations? So 2 questions to you there.
I think on the first question, I mean, I believe that the clients who engage me to be a mediation advocate or settlement counsel appreciate that I understand the process in more than just a theoretical way, that they know that I've got deep experience as a neutral in this space, and when it comes right from the start to selecting the right mediator, they know that my bandwidth of being able to put forward different panel of mediators who I believe would fit the bill and to explain why certain mediators would be better for the task is deep, not just on theory, but because I know how these mediators operate. So that's a piece that I think is very helpful if you are having a foot in both spaces, as a neutral as well as a mediation advocate. The truth of the matter is I actually still enjoy practice. I mean, there are people who come up to me and say, why don't you go full time and be a mediator? And my answer has been that, well, the day I become tired of being a lawyer, well, I might just do that. But at the moment, I really enjoy very much going into mediation and trying to, create value and to bring out the best for my client. I enjoy sparring in that mediation space. And I use that word deliberately because, a lot of us believe sometimes in the teaching that going to a mediation, you need to just be soft and collaborative. It is not. I think you can do your task very effectively. Think of the bands of negotiation and go in there, be assertive and take out something very useful for the client, pack it together, be useful in the settlement negotiation. So that's what I find very helpful. On the question of as a mediation lawyer, how do I effectively use the mediator's resources? I can't tell you how many times it is that as a counsel, sometimes I find myself being challenged in the sense that, when you've been there and done that and you feel that there are certain pathways that's open for a mediator to operate, you become sometimes overly critical. And so I found many instances where as a mediation advocate, I've got to sort of take a step backwards and remind myself, I'm not here to teach the mediator what to do or what I think is the right thing to do, but I'm representing my client. So there's a different way of communicating to the mediator what I think he might need to consider to break the impasse. And having, I think, a deep experience in counsel work in both the adversarial processes, I think brings on a very useful set of skills. I find that it makes me sharper when I need to debate those the case theories and talk about developments in the litigation arbitration landscape and what the BATNA would look like in a realistic way. I mean, those are pieces that unless you're in practice as an advocate, you might not really know. And so I believe that a lot of information helps me as a mediation advocate when we're talking about how to overcome impasse in the mediation process. Lots more to say, but I'll just leave it at that and bring that back to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Tad. Now I'd like to pan over to John right now, and you would have a lot of clients and lawyers who look up to you as a mediator to be a problem solver, especially because right now it's a paid service, and in a private mediation, it's not a pro bono court-deferred mediation or court mediation. So how do you balance those expectations? I mean, of a client, looking out there for a settlement, and knowing very well that this is at the end of the day a very consensual, self-determined process, wherein at the end of the day they're the ones making that final decision. And how do you work, as Tat was saying, with the partners and the partners of both the parties? How do you keep that balance going as a private mediator?
Yeah, can I just say, first of all, that I really like the way that Tat presented that. And I think that for those of you who are listening, if you can find a way to combine in your practice the ability to be a negotiation counsel, negotiation consultant, along with being a mediator, I think that's a very interesting career option, but I'll leave that. So to answer your question, I mean, the first thing I think I would say, Jonathan, is that there really should not, in my view, be any distinction between mediation in a court-referred way and private mediation. I mean, paid or not, the principles of mediation are the same. And a fundamental principle is that we mediators are not there to provide a solution. We're not problem solvers. That's absolutely essential. It's sometimes quite hard to hold on to that. Particularly if we're new and we're under some pressure, we feel we're under pressure from the expectations of clients and lawyers. And there's always a balance, of course. But our job is to help the lawyers and the clients, and they may have different needs, to understand the benefits of the process and to realize that for them to get the best result, the best deal, the best solution to their problem, they will need to explore what lies underneath the underlying interest. They need to take time to engage with the other party, find out what's really going on, identify and assess the options, all the jargon that we use, all the things we learn in the training. But it's not just mere theory. I mean, this, again, I can say this to those of you who are maybe less experienced. In my experience, having started off with all this theory, this is actually how it works. It makes commercial sense. And I always say to those with whom I'm working, let the process do its job, because it really works well. So don't rush to an earlier solution. Now, of course, that's easy to say. The more experience we have, the easier it may be. And then particularly for me to say that to you, but I want to encourage everybody to keep in mind the fundamentals. And we've actually got to resist, as mediators, if we're being true to our calling, being driven by the desires of the lawyers and the clients. And remember, they've learned things in a particular way, probably a different way, the adversarial way, the problem, the quest for immediate solution way. So it's natural for them to want to cut through. And just as Bruce and others have been saying, we've got to respect that, understand that, and work with them. And it's natural, perhaps, that they would want us just to broker a deal. But for me, that's not really mediation. And there are deal broker mediators. And I have to say, I somewhat despair of that, because I don't think we're bringing the richness, the potential, the creativity, and the added value for which we should be being paid. So I always say to the clients who want to rush, if it was easy, you would have sorted this out, and I wouldn't be here. The reason I'm here is that it's not easy. And let me just give you an example. On mediation on Tuesday, I meet with the clients and the lawyers privately, separately, before we get together. And I don't necessarily have a full plenary session anymore. I think quite carefully about the combinations. Anyway, I met with the claiming party, and then I met with I met with the I did meet with the claiming party first, and as soon as we came to the end of that meeting, this is 9:30 in the morning, the claiming party's counsel said, well, I was just wondering what the offer we'll make now, just as we finish this, we'll send you in with an offer. And I said, well, I don't think just quite yet. It's a bit early for that. There's a little bit of choreography to be gone through. So she had an instinct that she should start this mediation by making an offer. And that party did not at any time thereafter make an offer, nor did they receive an offer until towards the final stages of the negotiation after 4 o'clock that afternoon. And it was a very nuanced, I hope carefully crafted approach as we narrowed differences, but we didn't get into that formulaic approach at all. So I think that somebody mentioned coaching. So part of our job gently is to coach the lawyers and the clients to understand the benefits of doing things in a different way. And it takes competence and confidence. And I hope, again, the reassurance that I hope I can give to others who are listening to be true to the process, be true to what we understand mediation to be, and you will get better results for your clients, whether you're paid or not, frankly.
Thank you, John. As private mediators practicing for so many years now, you would have had, I know that private mediators are very, very conscious and very, very delicate about the principles of mediation, like confidentiality and voluntariness and neutrality, impartiality, self-determination. And this is something that has been a core of your practice. But, being there as risk takers, as people who have started your careers from scratch, you would have made a lot of mistakes on the way. So here's a small section now to get to understand some of your biggest goof-ups or mistakes that you regret making during your early days of your career maybe, and something that you regret now, but it's a lesson for all of us to learn from, a big no-no for all of us planning to get into the profession of mediation. Bruce, I'm going to start with you because since you have the most years under your belt, you'll have more mistakes. So let's get started.
Made the most mistakes too, is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, yes. Please go ahead.
Well, I think big picture first, one of the unique challenges of our job is we perform our services largely in a vacuum, independent of peer review, independent of folks with knowledge of the profession able to give insight. And so I think it's especially important that we become self-critical, at least self-reflective. And one of the tools I try and share with people is at the end of each mediation, I try and take notes on some of the things I've learned about the process. Not so much the case, but things I've learned for myself as a mediator. And so that's one step. Another possibility is to join self-reflective groups where you can discuss some of your experiences, good, bad, and otherwise. But I've ducked your question long enough, Jonathan. My sort of bad experience and my sort of what I call in the world of mediation, bloody nose moments, where I get punched in the nose by something in the moment that I then hopefully learn from the next time I come into a mediation room. It really is under the umbrella heading of pushing too hard. I mean, I really liked John's statement of letting the process do its job. And because we're all fundamentally believers in the process. And those times where I've gotten a bloody nose, it's where I've gotten out ahead of the process. And to be very specific, I had a case where I was told by a lawyer that he and his client had put together the biggest and best settlement package they would ever put together. And my job was to go into that boardroom down the hall and sell this, to the other side. And I did, and I sort of laid myself out and left my credibility on the table, being as hard a champion and advocate for settlement as I could be. Realized as I sort of looked around the room that my message was falling on a group of deaf ears. And ultimately, it was not successful. Ultimately, the group did not come back to me for any further mediation. I was fired in essence, but without even the privilege of people sort of formalizing the end of our relationship. And in conversation about 6 months later, I learned that this lawyer who I had sort of trusted in telling me that he was at his best position, he and his client had come up with another couple $1 million and settled the case. And so a lesson, for me is, about how hard to push, certainly let the process, do its thing, play out in a way that we know it can and should to be successful. And at the end of the day, it's not so much that people are lying to us. It's that, we need to give people a chance to develop their thinking and to mature to the options that are we can help create and put in front of them. And over time, they're likely to shift their thinking. And it's not so much about lying as it is about just being involved in the process itself. But that's one of those bloody nose moments that I take to heart and try and continually look for the right balance in the mediation process.
Being contemplative in action, Bruce. That's, I think, before a mediator goes on and does something or pushes or pulls. I think that's your message, if I get it right.
Yeah.
Let's move on to John and let's hear from him.
So I think it's really important that we have this question. Tat, you mentioned humility earlier on, and Jonathan, to be quite honest with you, I was slightly uncomfortable at the start when you kind of put us all up on a pedestal. I think we should try to be different in the mediation profession and not see some of us as superstars or the Legal 500 as a hall of fame. This year, I have declined to put my name forward for the legal directories. Now that will cost me some embarrassment because I've already been dropped down a section in chambers, I think. I just am uncomfortable with all of this. So I think we need to be humble, and we're all in this together. However, to answer your question, I have many of these head and hands moments, but the one that keeps coming back to me is an early meeting with a large client team in a large room in a hotel where we were mediating. And we had, I don't know, the FD, we had the chairman, we had chief executive with various experts, we had the lawyers, and it was a really difficult case for this party, a lot of money at stake. And somebody came in late, and this person came in and sat down at the table. And I don't know whether I was anxious or I wanted to please, but I asked, I said, who are you? And he said, well, I'm the vice chairman, the vice president in charge of operations. And I said, and will you still be vice chairman in charge of operations tomorrow? And it was just meant to be a throwaway joke. And everybody's face, just the color just drained. He was the guy who was responsible for the mess that they were in. And it was a real question as to whether or not he would still be vice president of operations tomorrow, and that depended upon the result. And there was just nowhere to go. So I outside the end of that meeting, I took him and his senior colleague aside. And I just said, I am really sorry. That was an attempt, a joke. It was completely misplaced, and I am very, very sorry for having done that. And I think one just has to be prepared to be completely, again, it's back to authenticity, open and indeed vulnerable in these situations. But in modeling humility, openness, and vulnerability, A, it might just get you past that, and B, you're demonstrating what they will always also need to be if they're going to move forward through this, albeit in these robust commercial cases. Anyway, thank you for asking the question. I think it's good to reflect that none of us is what's the word, fail safe when it comes to these. We're all vulnerable to making mistakes, and we need to accept that and learn from that.
Thank you, John. So I hear humility and also basically making sure that you are using your sense of humor with the right person out there.
That was the point, actually. Don't make jokes at other people's expense. Use humor or lightness of touch. Any jokes at one's own expense only.
Yes, that's the policy. You want to go next and tell us one of your head in the hand moments?
Yeah, I like Bruce bloody nose moments, and I think all of us during our mediations have many of those. Well, to go back to one of them, I remember one side gave me a message, and I was very stressed. It was the end of the day. I was tired, and I took it back to the other room and gave it. It was not confidential. I had to take that message, but I took that message without really taking the poison out. I was myself getting a little angry and tired, and I delivered it without really taking the poison out. And we slipped dramatically with that. So now I pause, I reflect, I put it into the right words. I try to before I take it to the other room.
So you're highlighting the role of a mediator as someone who neutralizes the message that goes across from the encoder to the decoder. I see.
Yeah.
That similar experiences?
Yeah. But let me preface that by saying I so agree with what John just said in terms of humility and how you know, the profession, I feel sometimes is developing at a pace where it creates a little bit of unhealthy competition that you know, in certain cases, I have had mediators who start the opening statement by saying, I have a 90% success rate. And I just cringe when people say that, because I'm thinking, well, you know, it's not about you, right? In my mind, you know, I'm thinking, well, you know, those mediations where you do succeed, you know, it is possibly the work, the heavy lifting of the council before you, who have done so much of, you know, working with you in the shadow of the work that you do, that has allowed you. And so please do not beat around that 90%. So that's just me saying this, right? But I'll tell you a story that has nothing to do with this, but in the early days, in my work as a private mediator, I often think that it was like what I learned in Harvard mediation workshops. And like, you know, they say, if you reach a settlement at the end, there should be, you know, lots of spiritual sort of happiness, you know, that sense that you really, you know, managed to do a process where people leave totally happy. So I was really into that. American party with an Asian party had a rather difficult mediation. At the end, they settled. And so, you know, that's just me. I'm thinking, wow, this is that wow moment. And so at the end, I said, well, shall we all stand up and, you know, just shake each other's hands? And, you know, I still remember, you know, the American company representative looked at me, and then, you know, without blinking an eye, she said, and then what, sing Kumbaya, hold hands? And then she stormed out. And I was left to rue on what just happened in the room. But it kind of reminded me, you know, to temper, you know, the exuberance with, you know, the sense that people may not leave the room with the sense of a win-win, but a solution that they can really just live with. And that's good enough, you know, but, you know, it's not really about you again, but, you know, it's about people finding closure and then moving away. But that was my story, but I learned a lot from just that experience.
Thank you, Tad. Talking about party poopers or party breakers here, you know, not everyone is like that, and you have clients who actually have that goodwill and who have really enjoyed the process and who want to go out there and spread the word and tell everyone that they had an amazing experience with you. So here's me to quote John. I did lift her up the pedestal. I brought her down. Now it's time to go back there. So you have had clients who have had this really nice experience of mediating with you. So I don't see Tara's video on, so that means we still have some time to quickly get this last question in there. And I'm looking forward for a quick 60-second response from all of you. How do we use this goodwill that's generated with some of our clients? How do we make them ambassadors of private mediation? How do we put the word out there? What's your take on advertising? What's your take on promoting yourself as a private mediator? Anyone can go first. That's all right.
When I buy an Apple computer, Apple doesn't get in touch with me and ask me to be their ambassador. I am their ambassador if it works really well and I like it. So if we do really well with our mediations, conduct them really well with authenticity, humility, courtesy, and respect, then we hope that those with whom we work will become our ambassadors. We don't need to tell them to be or encourage them or urge them to be. That said, second point, recently I managed to ask a group of 6 lawyers and 6 clients who have been all experienced in mediation to get together and put together a call to action to business and the public sector, calling people to make more use of mediation. So that was a collective effort taken after some time and some consideration. So there are different ways of approaching it, but fundamentally do the job well.
Laila, you want to go next?
I totally agree with John. When you do a good mediation, they become your ambassadors. One advice for the Indian lawyers who have experienced good mediation, I would request them to use mediation more, and they can do that only if they structure their legal fees. How do you structure your fees for mediation? Just as you structure your fees in litigation and in arbitration, structure your fees for mediation, participating in mediation, so that you don't lose out.
All right, fee structure. Yes, Bruce.
For me, the narrow answer has been said, which is the single most important thing one can do to create ambassadors, to create goodwill, is to do a good job in delivering mediation services. And that includes what everybody's been saying the last hour and a half: humility, checking your ego at the door, respect, authenticity, all of those words that get repeated time and again. The broader picture for people to keep in mind is that the last hour and a half, we've been speaking of a fairly narrow slice of the dispute resolution community. And I think there's room for all of us to take our skill set and apply it in a variety of settings, in conflicts, in our communities and in our world, in ways that help raise everyone's awareness about the potential of mediation. And in that fashion, when that starts to happen, I think we'll see everybody become ambassadors of mediation when they see the kinds of results that are achievable.
I think, well, my starting point is that I think if you practice with a great deal of honesty, passion, and authenticity, people will see and be convinced of the merits of the work that you do. I think there has to be that degree of honesty in the work that we do. But part of me also understands that, you know, in the commercial landscape, when we talk about commercial mediation, there is also a need to go out there and to publicize, if you like, yourself, because otherwise people may not know who you are in the scheme of the many other service providers. So I think the tension is to do the work that you do honestly, focus really on doing good work, but also be willing to put yourself out there in a, I would say, a humble way, a respectful way, and not taking things for granted. That would be my slightly longer than expected answer.
Thank you, Tad. I'm now going to hand it over to Tara. She's got a few concluding remarks and maybe even a question from the audience.
Jonathan, I think we are running low on time and mindful of the fact that it's extremely late at night for Tat, and Bruce is starting his day, and John probably has his commitments for the rest of the afternoon. We do have a lot of questions, but this is what I am going to tell our audience. We are going to work with our panelists to answer each of your questions and send out an email. I'm hesitant to keep this conversation going longer simply because we are running short on time. But this has been a fascinating discussion. It's been a unique discussion because the whole idea of private mediation, and again, the distinction, John, as you have raised, is very small. We're talking about a practice in India that differs from pro bono services in the court program to private mediation where parties are paying for the services of a mediator. And this practice where clients are paying for the services of a mediator is just developing. And thank you for being part of the early discussions on this practice. Thank you to each one of you. To our audience, we shall send out a response by email. We will be working with our panelists to kind of put together all the questions that we've received. We've received many comments and questions from all of you, and we will be in touch with you by email. So thank you all once again for spending the past hour and a half with us. It's been a pleasure. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks for the last session of this series, which will be on accreditation and standards and how to build the mediation movement from the perspective of creating quality mediators. Again, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to being in touch with all of you again in another 2 weeks. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay happy. Thank you.